Have you ever wondered how come the wisest king in the Bible ended up having about 1,000 wives and concubines? Of course, it's a very interesting story, and I'm about to tell you all of it, including how the life of this young and promising king ended on a sad and disappointing note. You definitely want to watch until the end to discover what happened to him. Number 1. Solomon's promising start. No doubt about it, King Solomon's reign began on a high note. And judging by his early days, it's easy to group him into one of those favorite biblical character spots. This young and impressive king also penned down most of the wisdom you can find in the Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes today, so it's easy to see why he's one of Israel's most popular kings. As the beloved son of David and Bathsheba, he seemed to be the nicely bow-tied answer to the hot mess David got himself into in the previous generation. His given name meant peace, and he was the second child of David and Bathsheba. However, his older brother, who was Bathsheba's first child, died as a toddler because of the sinful web surrounding his birth. So, Solomon's family valued forgiveness, just as many of us are born into families that uphold certain virtues today. But then, does that really make us carriers of such virtues? Well, I'll talk about this later, but for now, let's get back to Solomon's story. Although Solomon was born in the palace, his early days were not as perfect as you envision for such a powerful household. In fact, he was raised in a palace that was filled with strife. Even as a growing child, he watched all the havoc his brothers Amnon and Absalom wreaked in Israel. The Bible records that his brother Adonijah went as far as declaring himself king while David was still alive. Thankfully, Bathsheba's quick action, alongside Prophet Nathan's wise counsels, prevented this from happening. After all, his father David had anointed Solomon as his successor before his death. 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 29 to 30 reads, "And the king swore, saying, As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my soul out of every adversity, as I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, Solomon, your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. Even so will I do this day." While giving his farewell speech, David advised Solomon to be strong and walk in obedience to all the laws and commands of God. He further promised that Solomon's children and grandchildren will be successors to the throne if they continue in the ways of the Lord. This was even more proof to everyone present that Solomon was the anointed king. And from what the Bible tells us, Solomon followed this advice, at least for the first few years of his reign, as seen in the scripture. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 3. "And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David. Only he sacrificed and burnt incense in high places." This verse shows how well Solomon loved and feared God at this point in his life. God responded to Solomon's obedience and sacrifices by appearing to him in Gibeon and making an incredible offer. "What should I give you?" This was God giving Solomon a blank check and saying, "Here, take it, fill it in with anything you want." And now, come to think of it, what if the Lord woke you up and gave you such an offer? What would you say? Well, your honest answer should reveal where your treasure really is. Consider everything Solomon could have asked for. Yes, he was king, but even presidents and prime ministers of today's biggest countries still want more. And the devil constantly pounces on our desires for more money, more fame, and more power to sell himself to us. Remember, he even offered to give Jesus the world and everything in it if he bowed to him? So in what ways is your selfish desire for things of earthly value pushing you to bow to the ruler of this world? Are you cheating to gain higher positions? Changing figures in your office to get more money? Or walking in the way of sinners for influence? Solomon's response demonstrated in some way that he was wise beyond his age. The young man was aware of his shortcomings. He had no leadership experience and needed a receptive heart to judge and rule the people correctly. Indeed, realizing your limitations as a human and that you desperately need God in your most important decisions is the first step toward becoming a kingdom person. Listen to Hebrews 4:16, which talks about God's intention to always release His grace and mercy to steer us beyond where our strength and understanding can go. It says, "And still, He calls us into Himself. He says, I understand, and I have the mercy and grace you need most." God was so pleased that Solomon requested wisdom when he could have requested riches or more power. so he granted the request and added flavors that Solomon didn't ask for, including riches, honor, and long life. Solomon became the wisest man that ever lived. He also became the wealthiest man that ever lived on earth, as revealed in the scriptures. 1 Kings 3:12-13. I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. However, for these promises to continue to manifest in Solomon's life, he would have had to continually walk in the way of the Lord as his father had taught him. God's promises always stand true, but they can only be attained through complete obedience. Also, beyond telling this interesting story, the author of 1 Kings intends us to use Solomon's early reign to demonstrate to us that wisdom is beyond acquiring knowledge and understanding. Instead, the best form of wisdom is being able to apply spiritual understanding to earthly living. God has given Solomon an unconventional ability to see the world through a spiritual lens and use that lens in everyday life. No wonder Solomon became a great king and an excellent administrator. He even went on to construct the temple his father had envisioned. Indeed, Solomon's temple was an incredible building, surpassing the great craft put into the tabernacle and marking a new point in Israel's history. It was so incredible that the Bible dedicated 3 chapters from 1 Kings 5-7 to describe the works of the temple. And to achieve this architectural feat, Solomon employed builders from all corners of his kingdom. From accomplished professionals to forced laborers, the people of the kingdom contributed their knowledge and skills to help build the temple. In doing so, Solomon was able to involve many people in the building and sustenance of his kingdom. Plus, whether or not Solomon intended it, employing many people from all walks of life ensured that the vast majority of citizens held personal investments in the religious, political, economic, and social well-being of the kingdom. After building this very magnificent temple for the Lord, Solomon offered an incredible prayer of dedication in front of all the Israelites. So, for a king that made such a promising start to his reign, you'd naturally think it'd be all rosy throughout life, wouldn't you? Well, here's where the twist comes in, because it wasn't. Sadly, sin crept in, and so did issues the wise king never envisioned. Number 2. Solomon's progressing sin. Despite Solomon's powers, wealth, and royalty, he still made 3 great mistakes that would ultimately begin the story of his fall from grace. In fact, the Bible records that wealth and power became the causes of his mistakes. This shows that even when it seems like we're at our best, we can still make mistakes. No wonder the Bible admonishes believers in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, to take heed when we think we're standing, lest we fall. The devil, our adversary, is always prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for the slightest opportunity to devour us. Solomon's first deadly mistake was his love for many foreign women from nations of which God explicitly forbade such fraternization. And, as you probably already know, his marriage to 700 wives and 300 concubines was nothing short of astonishing. According to 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1-2, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. His involvement with many women foreshadowed future problems. Most of these marriages were to seal political alliances, but immorality was clearly a factor as well. Imagine the length 1,000 women will go when vying for his attention. And so, Solomon fostered an example of immorality to the Israelites. You can imagine how many people would consider immorality and marrying from nations God forbade, simply because Solomon, their shining example, did. This is why, as Christians, church leaders, and pastors, we are shining examples to many people, and we must be careful in our every act and behavior, because we do not know how many people we may be leading astray when we make mistakes. Beyond marrying these women, Solomon's mistake was also how affectionately he held them. These women of the world were apparently beautiful and seductive. His love for them, as the Bible described it, speaks more to physical attraction and very little, if at all, to pure spiritual love. It might be said that lust was the greatest driver in Solomon's pursuit of these women, and at the tail end of his life, he wrote how dangerous such pursuits are. Proverbs 6:25-28, keeping you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? Solomon's mistake was also in what his affection for his numerous wives and concubines led him to do. It led him to worship the idols revered by these pagan women. The Bible records that as Solomon grew old, his wife turned his heart to other gods, and his devotion to the Lord significantly reduced. According to 1 Kings 11:5-8, Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. Solomon might have done all of these in tolerance, but it shifted the king's heart away from God and became a gateway through which idolatry entered Israel, God's own nation. Sadly, Solomon's error caused him to suffer in his final years. God raised up adversaries for the king, such that the end of his reign became filled with troubles and wars. God appeared to Solomon again, but this time he wasn't as pleased with the king as he was the first time. Thus, instead of blessings, God registered his displeasure with Solomon, promising to tear his kingdom apart. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 11-13. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. However, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but I will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." The natural consequences of following Solomon's footsteps is the same today. A choice must be made, but choosing the path of sensuality prevents one from obeying God. However, obeying God makes it impossible to, at the same time, pursue such sinful paths. Choose like Solomon did, and you make a deadly mistake. Eventually, this lust, weakness, and lack of discipline regarding Solomon's relationship with women caused God to turn his back on him till he lost almost everything he had. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 28-39. Now Jeroboam was a man of standing, and when Solomon saw how well the young man did his work, he put him in charge of the whole labor force of the tribes of Joseph. About that time, Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, and Ahijah, the prophet of Shiloh, met him on the way wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone out in the country, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have 1 tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Moloch, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and laws as David, Solomon's father, did. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose, and who obeyed my commands and decrees. I will take the kingdom from his son's hands and give you 10 tribes. I will give 1 tribe to his son, so that David, my servant, may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I chose to put my name. However, as for you, I will take you, and you will rule over all your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. If you do whatever I command you and walk in obedience to me and do what is right in my eyes by obeying my decrees and commands, as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever. Obviously, Solomon's life teaches us that even the most celebrated heroes have weaknesses that must be dealt with if they want to finish strong. Number 3. Solomon's pervading sadness. Known for his contributions to the Bible, Solomon is credited with writing Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. He must have realized in his ripe old age that his reign deviated to immorality and idolatry. He was just waiting to die and face God's judgment over the pointless life he had lived. In most parts of Ecclesiastes, he described what it was like to live under the sun without having a personal relationship with the creator of the sun. He went on to tell us all the things he tried in pursuit of happiness and how most of these things led him further away from God. Brothers and sisters, are we not still trying most of these things today? As we try to learn, we realize that we can have a full head with an empty heart. Solomon's palace was filled with laughter and happiness, but in the end, he realized that all of these things were vanity. Likewise, if you think the shortcut to genuine happiness is partying and eating, then you have missed the real essence of living. It is only in God's presence and through a working relationship with God that we can find real joy and happiness. Psalm 16, verse 11, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Solomon had all the earthly wealth you can think of at his disposal. Yet at the end of his life, when he realized how useless these things are in bringing true happiness, he was filled with sadness and dissatisfaction. Today, some of the wealthiest people in the world are still the most miserable people. Does this not show you that luxury does not bring true happiness? Solomon experimented with lust, but no amount of physical pleasure made him happy. Ecclesiastes 2, verse 11. "Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun." Thank God Solomon finally realized, although rather late, that the true source of happiness was from God. But have you realized? And what are you doing now to establish a true connection with the one who gives true happiness? Do let us know what you've learned from Solomon's life in the comments section. Plus, don't forget to like this video and subscribe now to see more beautiful biblical stories from us. See you in the next video.